Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to the ADH Dads. I am JJ.
And I am CJ.
Hey buddy, how are you doing this week?
Pretty good, man. I think after what is this, our 12th episode, somewhere around there, I think we finally got the intro down. We finally are learning to slow the ADHD brain down and let the other one say their name. So
That's
glad
funny,
you
buddy.
glad glad you took the intro this week because I was telling you, but my wife was over here the other day going, "Man, you do the intro a lot. I think you should let JJ have it. You guys are co-hosts, right? It's not your show." So
Well, what about those listeners who are very comfortable in the familiar space of consistency? Now we just thrown that a whole out of whack. What's that going to do to that anxiety level?
get used to it because that's parenting, brother. All right, you got to learn to adapt quickly.
Well, I think one thing I just like to talk about. I know it's always important to bring a certain level of our personal experience into this, and just tell people where we're at in the world. And one thing that happened yesterday is you had a birthday, which was pretty awesome. There was maybe a different type of celebration for your birthday this year than maybe when you were 20 years younger.
That's
But
for sure.
at the same time, it's just kind of like part of being an adult. You do get that sense of, oh, I really would like a little bit of acknowledgement. And I told you yesterday, when you told me you were going to enjoy some birthday cake, I said, birthday, what? Because I completely forgot about it because I had my own world of parenting going on during all of this weekend. But I still wanted to say happy birthday, buddy. I'm glad to celebrate you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And, I know that we get caught up in the chaos of this thing that we call dadding. So I know how it goes. My birthday, I didn't even do anything for myself. We took the kids to Disneyland. We had a sleepover on Friday and Saturday night. So I had four giggly girls running through the house, trying to deal with meltdowns and who plays with what doll and who stands in front of who and what line and who's sitting on who and what ride. So it was a lot of navigating that, but honestly, brother, there's no place I would rather be than creating those memories with the kiddos and my wife at Disney. So I was right where I wanted to be for my birthday wish. So it was a good day.
That's awesome. What does it look like to you? So you're talking about the giggly girls running around and they're having issues, with power dynamics and stuff. And then, you have to somehow act in that moment in some way to be, the responsible parent. But later on, you're giggling about it yourself. What did that look like in the moment?
A lot of confusion and a lot of me having to step into another room going, all right, how do you handle this? Jeez, never been here before. But no, it actually went pretty good. We actually had a moment, and I want to ask you if we've had a few talks about this before, and I think that this is a common thing for a lot of ADHD kids. But when I'm in it and I'm watching it all unfold in the weekend, I saw our oldest deal with a little bit of that friendship power dynamic with some of her group of friends, right? And I kind of had to coach her through that because she had her best friend come, and her best friend is kind of like the cool kid. She's so nice and intelligent and well thought and put together, and she just says the right thing. As from a parent perspective, watching this little girl, I'm like, wow, where did she come up with that? And the way that she deals with her friends, and just a very good friend. Everyone wants her attention, and it was no different this day, JJ. Everyone wanted to sit with this girl and wanted to stand in line with her and share their treats with her, and we kind of had to, at one point during the day, I saw this girl was a little struggling with it. We were in one of the stores looking for souvenirs, and everybody's calling this girl's name, and she's going, oh, she's just trying to get a moment of peace to herself, and I could see she's struggling with it. She's walking around at her going, ay, caramba, and I said, oh, poor thing, and went back and had a moment where it was just Naomi and I kind of tried to bring that to her attention as respectful and supportive way as you can, right? But But in the role of a stepdad, I always get that, like, no, you're the bad guy. You're trying to hurt me. You're telling me the wrong thing. You're trying to trick me. And this was kind of like that, you know. I said, Naomi, I kind of notice your friend is feeling a little overwhelmed by all the attention. Everyone's fighting over her. And, you know, I saw that she was kind of frustrated by that. And, you know, I don't ever see this friend and I just want to spend time with her. And, you know, and I said, well, sometimes, you know, when you love something, you have to let it go and it'll come back to you. And she said, you're lying to me. You know, she said, I tried that at school and it didn't work. You're lying to me, you know, and we kind of just had to walk through together, you know, and I kind of had to tell her about some experiences where maybe my special brain, as we call it, you know, you're just so excited and you just want to get in there and be a part of it and feel that attention. But sometimes it can have the opposite effect that we really desire, you know, and so we got to kind of be conscious of other people's boundaries. And it was a hard discussion to have with 8-year-old, let alone an 8-year-old with ADHD processing, you know? So I had a lot of those moments of trying to navigate that and get into the dynamics of, you know, adolescent brains. So, but I think I handled it pretty well. And Naomi and I had some really good moments afterwards where she kind of showed me that she was, you know, receiving those ideas that I was talking about earlier, which is always a win as a dad, right? When you see that and then she has that moment of clarity of like, oh, you're right, you know, gonna have that dad like, yes, nailed it. So
when we give the kids our you know, our time and space and you know, especially our ears, I think that's what really helps them out, because, you know, like you said, the tendency for a child with ADHD or otherwise is to very much be, you know, giving themselves their own certain type of feedback and reinforcement to what they're feeling. So, you know, if something is taking place that's not quite in aligned with, you know, how they're justifying where they are in the situation, it's kind of going against what they want. And then, of course, if it's going in their favor, that's the reinforcement the other direction. So either way, they're reinforcing how they're feeling. And when you give them the time and space, and then maybe, you know, inject a little bit of your your perspective with them after we've given them the time to speak, you know, ADHD or not, at least with my kiddo, I've noticed that, yeah, the conversation might have to extend maybe a little bit greater time, but it does still kind of settle within their heads once they're able to kind of, you know, let themselves feel heard. And at that point, when you've given her the safety of, you know, taking the time to kind of really sit in her thoughts and then give her a little bit herself, you see that circle around eventually. It doesn't happen quickly with our ADHD kids. You know, and the more we kind of suggest something to the contrary, the more they're going to also see us as the contrarian. And that's not what we're intending to do. We're essentially trying to advocate for them while also giving them the space to be themselves and hear and see the other side of things. And that's what my kiddo was doing on this last week. He had a moment too where it wasn't going his way, and he was so caught up in the idea of it not going his way and it was a problem that he didn't see the solution, you know, a few steps further down the road. But once it happened and then we got back to talking about it later, he felt very much safe with the idea of expressing how things didn't go well and how he didn't act in the way he wanted to. But that's okay, because the grace that was extended down that road was what really made this whole situation a success. And man, our kiddos, I mean, just like us, like you were, had like all these girls all of a sudden jumping on top of each other and making all this noise. You know, everybody wants a voice in there, and you're just like, this is going a little bit mad. Later on, when everybody got their calm and got their you know, voice heard, then you got to see all that beautiful grace extended to each individual kid. And yeah, the chaos is part of the process, but sometimes the chaos brings us to that great resolve.
Well, let me ask you something here, because we're here trying to get into extreme ownership today. And something that I notice with our oldest with ADHD is she has a hard time with ownership. Um, I'm thinking back to this Disneyland trip here, and whenever I was trying to point out, Naomi's behavior in this situation and how maybe she was affecting her friend, she would displace that responsibility onto the other girls that were here. Well, this girl is taking her attention. Well, this girl wants to sit in front of her lunch. If they weren't here, then I would be able to, or, it was kind of like that. And you just gave this beautiful story about Cohen and how he kind of came to his own conclusion of that ownership and took responsibility for that part in it. And do you see that he's able to do that easily, or is that something that you struggle with in your parenting with him? I'm wondering if this is an ADHD problem or if it's just a me problem.
I think the way we talked about it all the way up to this point in this episode so far is that it requires time, space, grace, all that stuff that we tend to not, I guess, believe or experience in the moment when it's all happening all at once. And I mentioned the word escalation previously. Escalation is something that kids, struggle with. It's very obvious when they're in a power dynamic struggle, the volume control is just out the window. There is no way of keeping those kids, at a reasonable volume. Just walk into a grocery store where kids are in the cereal aisle, right? It's going to happen. That the what works for me best again is not that I'm expecting Cohen to have it all just in line and figured out based on previous experience when he's in the middle of a state of escalation. It's coming back to that later. And, and being able to show the grace, just acknowledging, yeah, it didn't go well. There were some mistakes you made, but that's not where the conversation ends. It's okay. Everybody does have a state of calm in them, even when they're ADHD and they're energized most of the day, perhaps. There's still a chance to reflect. We had an incredibly successful last couple of weeks, which I even noted with his mom, that I've seen a level of maturity in him that I haven't seen up to this point in his life. He was able to articulate his place and where he was. And I'll share the story briefly. He was in the zone in his mind doing some sort of play pretend, and he was running up behind me. A friend was with him, and he kept running up where my one older dog is running, kind of walking behind me because he just tends to take up the rear. But I could feel the slack in the leash every single time Cohen ran up on him. The dog was anxious and shuffling his feet around, trying to dodge my kiddo, who was scaring him a little bit. And I had to remind him many times, please don't scare the dogs. And he kept doing it. Finally, I just said, stop scaring the dog. And my voice was elevated, and he looks me directly in the eye, screams at me, and then runs into the snow, dives headfirst into the snowbank, and then goes, "You pushed me." So he was doing the power dynamic there, and it was escalated. I escalated it. Obviously, I lost my cool. It didn't go well. It took us a while to calm down, and I didn't give him the benefit of the doubt at first. At first, I said, I told you many times, you heard me say, stop scaring the dogs. And he said, no, I didn't. I really didn't. I was doing this. He was telling me about how he was running within and around the lines of the sidewalk, slabs. He was literally focused in his world of what he wanted to do. And he was owning up to that part of it, saying, I was just being myself, playing. I was focused there. I didn't hear that. And I as a person who doesn't have, a full understanding of his mind and his almost 7-year-old brain, ADHD or not, I was just taking my situation and applying it directly to his, which wasn't fair to him. And I need to be more mindful just in general, because he showed me, hey, truth is, you missed the mark on what you saw. And I'm telling you what it is. And I have to build trust with him. How do I build trust with him? I listen to the words he has to say. If he's struggling in a moment, Why is it that he's struggling? What feelings is he feeling? Those feelings are real. His thoughts that I pushed him into the snowbank? No, that's not true. I didn't push him at all, but still, he was feeling scared. He was feeling sad or hurt. And he thought that he was doing this. And because I told him otherwise, he was hurt by that. But we got to circle around to it. I wish it wouldn't have gotten to the point of escalation, but sometimes escalation does bring us to a quicker resolve because we have to face the problem head on. And so I gave him grace. He gave me grace. He spoke to exactly what he was doing, and I believed him. It was an absolute amazing success, and I wouldn't change anything, even though, yeah, it sucks to have to raise your voice to your kiddo.
Okay, so what does extreme ownership look like in that moment for you? How do you show up and talk to your son about this isn't the way I want to show up, and or these are the mistakes, or what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I think extreme ownership should come before a fight. I think it should come before conflict, but that takes a lot of work internally. It takes a lot of work for us to get to that place, and we're never going to be perfect with it. In that moment, I at first was taking ownership over the whole situation and not giving any to him. And then we talked about it, and I realized I was mistaken in what I defined as the situation to be. So I told him, I said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I did not see it the way you see it. And you just explained it to me in a way that not only makes sense, but is the truth that you know. So I need to apologize. I need to be truly remorseful for what I did. And I need to express to my kiddo why I'm remorseful, what it is that I did wrong, and how I can do better next time, or how I aim to do better. Because truth is I don't know if I'm going to do better next time every time. I would like to promise that, but that's a really hard thing to do because you don't know what the next situation looks like. And it's funny because we're talking about our kiddos and we mentioned ages and stuff. And I talked with guys just the last couple days. I don't know what that next situation is going to be. I feel like often I think that Cohen has reached a level of maturity here and we've turned a corner. But I'm like, well, okay, we turned the corner, but what's around the corner? Sometimes you don't know what's around the corner. So what do? I have to take ownership for every single part in my situation. And I would love to talk about that on a deeper level with relationships between adults too, because I think this is a really important thing for us as people who have lived some of us many decades of life and still bring our childhood into our current relationships, and we don't take enough ownership over it, or we pass the trauma that we experience from, say, our parents. We try to pass that off onto them, which I've even done on this podcast to a degree, where I talk about the trauma and I don't talk about eventually having to take ownership over the actions you make toward other people because of the trauma you experience. At some point, you still made the action, so you still need to own up to it. So I guess in that situation with Cohen and in my personal experience, extreme ownership is really just saying, okay, I can talk about the other person all I want, but the only person I have ownership over and their actions is myself. I can't take ownership for other people. I can influence and be a good influence to them, but that does not mean I have now owned their perspective, their feelings, and their thoughts in that.
Yeah, and I think that this is such a difficult thing for humans to accept responsibility. I think that a lot of us, myself included, it's comfortable falling into a victim mentality, right? Like it's really easy telling yourself a story that, if only, if this person did this, or if circumstances were different, or if they reacted this way, or if they didn't say this, then I would have had my ducks in a row in order to show up, right? And I think that a lot of us do that, especially in relationships and marriage. We have a lot of resentment in a lot of those dynamics, as far as, well, she didn't do this, or I don't get this in the marriage, or I don't have enough sex, or she talks to me this way, or she doesn't clean, or whatever your thing is. But if she did that, then things would be great. We would be great if only I just need her to do this. I just need this person to do that. And I definitely fall victim to that. I definitely have in the past. In my previous marriage, 9 years, of that mindset. And like you're saying, I've fallen into that kind of talk too on this podcast when it comes to my own parents, and the upbringing that I had, and some of the things that I wish I had or didn't. And it's really since I started the dad journey that I think about my dad all the time. I tell you what, you know, I realized that my dad did a lot of good, but I was so focused on all these things that I felt slighted on or didn't get, or didn't felt showed up for in the right way, and I held that with me for so long. And to a point where it would show up in conflicts in my life or relationships in my life, I would give it that definition, that designation of, well, that's because my dad did that. Just don't do that next time was the mindset that I had, right? Like, oh, you messed up. That's not how you want to show it. Just don't do it next time. That's the strategy. That's the goal, And it wasn't until I really started taking responsibility for that and almost looking forward to the moments where I would stumble that I felt like I started having success with course correcting or growing from. Because in that state of mind of just don't do it next time, there's no strategy, there's no plan, there's no defining or labeling anything of what's going on internally with you. It's just a conflict avoidance, pain avoidance kind of mentality. But once I started looking at it and, man, I didn't show up the right way there, or I raised my voice or said something that is not in alignment with who I want to be. And instead of just going, well, just don't do that next time, I started thinking about it in a way of, okay, let's take responsibility for that. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? What were you feeling in that moment? What feelings were bubbling up for you? And, maybe in the first beginning stages of that, there was a lot of that displacement, right? There was a lot of that, well, she said that, and that's why I did this, but if I could take that picture out and go, okay, well, I didn't like that she said that, but if I responded differently, this could have gone a different direction. So how can I take ownership over that piece in that moment and show up, given the tools, the resources, the knowledge, the things that we talk about on this podcast and in our calls and one-on-one? How can I take that into that moment? So instead of waiting for the things to blow up or waiting for me to make the mistakes, I would start right after, of looking forward to the next time. How do I want to show up? How do I want to take ownership over this last conversation that happened? And how can I turn that around for the next time? Think about it in a different way.
Okay, buddy. So do you have an example of, that could help a listener out with a moment that you realize, I'm going to take responsibility and I'm going to do some course correction, something that is concrete for somebody to say, oh, I've had a similar experience. I could apply this in this way based on what I understand now.
Journaling. If I had one piece of advice, I guess it would be journaling, like an accountability journal, right after those moments, or oftentimes when I am fighting with my wife, I'll break out that journal. That's just a concrete way to kind of organize thoughts. And then once the emotions and the chaos of the situation has maybe calmed down for you emotionally, it's always nice to kind of go back and see where that heightened sense of emotions has taken your brain, right? And how you show up when the emotions are high like that. I think it's a good time to, when my wife and I are arguing and we break off for a cool down moment or a collect your thoughts kind of scenario, that writing all that stuff down on a piece of paper or in a journal can really just serve you well, again, once you calm down and have a different perspective of looking at that. So I think through that practice and through that repetition is when you can kind of start to see maybe behavioral traits in yourself or emotional patterns that you aren't aware of when things are heightened like that. And I think that if you're really gonna, this work of extreme ownership is that, like, you have to know thyself, right? You have to know how you respond and how you react and what your triggers are. And I think a lot of us, because that's such hard work and it's so uncomfortable, are really scared to dive into that. It's an uncomfortable feeling to think
Mm.
about how you don't show up or you suck, you know. Um, but I think that through that you get to know yourself in a way that, leaves you open to growth and awareness.
So if you're in a moment of conflict and then you've stepped away and the two of you have had an opportunity to breathe and process and journal or whatever it is that somebody feels is helpful for their process, what if in that process of stepping away, you have a hard time seeing the other person's side, or let's just say you've come to this conclusion like, no, I think I was in the right there. How do you come back when you're in that place, in that mindset, to follow up and still create some sort of peace and understanding and growth?
Hmm. I've been working on this method that I've been trying to employ in my own life here. And it's this kind of strategy of just inquiry and asking rather than trying to tell. So, it's kind of like this 4-step process of, listening, asking, reflecting, and reflecting. So, and the reflect, I'll get to that. But, I think the first step is I got to do is just shut up and listen, to my wife.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I want to interrupt and interject my opinion or my fix-all solution, the man explanation of how to solve her problems. And
Nobody loves that.
that's and nobody loves that. It doesn't serve anybody. So listening, I think, to get all the facts, and that goes to that second step, which is ask. And ask questions. How does that make me feel? How do you think that you should handle that? Or just some strategies around that to kind of get their perspective and opinion on what's going on in their life or with us or in the moment. And then that reflect. The first reflect, I think, is an inward reflection. How does this make me feel? How does what she's saying affect me? And how am I going to respond to that? Rather than just reacting in the moment, that self-reflection of not only how does this make me feel, but why does this make me feel this way? Where is that coming from? Is this a her thing, or is this a childhood thing that I'm, putting on her? And, maybe I'm just misunderstanding her and misinterpreting her, which is why I think that that second step, or the fourth step, is so important. The reflect is, I think, an outward reflection, the mirroring, the labeling aspect of the conversation. So to make sure that you have understood everything that's going on, I heard you say this, what I'm hearing is this, you just said this. Am I safe to say that you're feeling this way? Just trying to really nail home and define the feelings that are coming up from your other partner. And now notice, JJ, in those 4 steps, at no point did I say fix, fix or respond. I didn't even say respond, man. I just, I think, we naturally will get to the response, right? And communication and stuff. But I think that, in order to understand everything that's going on and to really formulate how you want to respond and how you really think about this scenario, you got to take care of those other 4 steps first. And all of that is being present and engaged with your partner, listening and asking and reflecting and labeling.
No mansplaining. Yeah, I really appreciate that, and I'll say, because I am a little bit out of the world of having a romantic partnership, I can say a lot of these things, but putting them into practice is something that definitely looks different for me right now. But all what you said is exactly what I've been trying to practice in my co-parenting relationship. And one of the things that I've done, I would say, especially in the last 6 months, I believe I've stepped up a lot, is looking at past experience and trying to just analyze myself without pointing the finger in whatever that looks like in my thoughts. So if this happened, well, how did I respond? Did I respond because I had all the information and it tapped into some of my emotional states that I struggle with or that I wrestle with? Did it tap into my trauma? Where is it coming from that I'm experiencing this emotional response? Do I have enough information? If I don't have enough information, then I need to be curious, like you mentioned, ask questions, go through the inquiry process. That's extreme ownership for me is really just, you know, taking whatever occurred, and if I'm going to in any way suggest something about what the other person might have thought or said or felt, then I better at first understand myself in that position fully. And then, even if I don't see eye to eye with that person, then I better start asking questions about them rather than making the assumptions. It's great to, assumptions is, it's not labeling, it's not mirroring. Those are things where you're actually trying to understand the other person. That's that inquiry they're talking about. And I think, it's possible for people to get a little bit confused when you start to suggest through your own words what you saw the other person doing or what they might have been thinking or feeling. That can be dangerous. But if you give them the space by saying, I believe this, then you're allowing them the opportunity to respond and feel safe. Because honestly, when I've been in situations in the past where escalation occurs, usually it's my defenses that are coming out rather than my ears to listen and my one mouth to shut up.
Yeah, and it's such a common trap, I feel, that I see in a lot of married couples, with again, that displacement of responsibility when it comes to communication. She misheard me, or she doesn't understand what I'm saying, or she's just not getting it, is a common thing that I feel I hear a lot in a lot of relationship dynamics. And I'm definitely, again, someone who has fallen into that trap, my friend. And, I would like to challenge the listeners out there that maybe kind of fall into that frame of thought, that there's still extreme ownership to be had in that dynamic when somebody is misunderstanding you or mishearing you or not getting the words that you're saying. That's still a we problem, right? That's a you problem. Say it a different way, bud. Stop yelling and stop wagging a finger in front of your spouse's face. And I'm saying you here, but I'm really talking to Coley here. Years ago, that was definitely a trap that I fell into. And once I started discovering some healthier ways to communicate and to express myself, is when I got a lot further. And I realized that it wasn't a them problem, not misunderstanding me or taking my words out of context. It was a me and my patience with myself and my own verbal communication and abilities. So again, I think that there's extreme ownership that can be found and had and practiced in any situation that we can. And I think that as men and fathers and leaders, wanting to grow and be better in our lives, we have to look for those moments as they arrive, because I don't see any growth happening if you aren't able to take responsibility for your part in it. You can point fingers all day and say, well, if things were different and circumstances were changed, I would have been here. But there's no growth that's ever going to happen there by you pointing at somebody else. The only growth that can happen is for yourself. You can't make somebody else grow. You can't force them to. And, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So why not just drink your own water? Worry about your own thirst and your own needs and how you can grow in that situation. So otherwise, how else are you going to?
One of the most destructive words or phrases is "but." We suggest that we're taking ownership, but this happened, or I'm sorry that I did this. I just noticed this. Well, as soon as you say but you're basically saying I've justified why I did that. I'm saying sorry because it sucks that we got to that place. Well, we got to that place because you brought me there, rather than saying, okay, hard stop. I'm so sorry for this. Is there such a true remorseful statement there when we decide, hey, I'm not going to actually be responsible for all of this, which you don't have to be responsible for how everything went down. But when you choose to word it that way, the other person hears it as, this guy's not taking any responsibility anymore. He's not really sorry. He's saying the situation got out of control only because of this. He's sorry that he was taking part in the, getting out of control, but he is telling me the only reason why it got out of control is because of what I did. And that's the but is one of the most destructive forms of communication, or words in communication, between partners and kids, and anybody who has a conflict. So that's one of the big pieces of ownership that I see people struggle with, is that they still want to find a way to justify what they're doing, or they're weighing out, like, let's say, well, yeah, sure, I did these things, but this person also did those things. What's the damage repair look like when you then say, this person also did this, so they're responsible as well? So if I'm going to apologize, then they must apologize. Well, why not just be the best example you can be by saying that? It's not being weak. It's not suggesting that the other person has it all figured out. No, it's owning up to yourself and leaving it at that. I've seen far and away much better results coming together, repair, when it stops at that point of, I'm making my apology, and I want to do better by being better myself. And that's it. If they take that and they really put that in their heart, put it on their hearts, they're going to come to you too. And they're going to do something similar, I would assume, if they want this relationship to be a success. That's not an expectation we need to put on them. We expect ourselves to be better.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think that that's the trap that we fall into, right? Is you expect that other person to take responsibility for theirs and justify yours, and we just go tit for tat, back and forth. I mean, every argument that I've ever been in is because you want to feel heard, right? My wife wants to feel heard. And somehow we're just going over on top of each other. Yeah, but you, but yeah, but you, but yeah, okay, but you, but, again, that but word. So how, going back to your question, it's just got me thinking, how can we accept responsibility for our part in it and let go if the other person doesn't, and still be okay with that dynamic? How can you be okay with the responsibility that you've taken and the growth that you're doing, and not be hurt by the resentment or the holding on to of what you didn't get?
Early on in relationships, I think it's pretty natural for people to try to want to, be their best selves and advocate for the other person. But we do, in a previous episode with our guest, he kind of talked about this as well. Is that somewhere along the line, we don't just like kind of say, oh, I just noticed that moment where I actually I've maybe given up a little bit of my identity to try and win this person over. But there is a little bit of that dependency that occurs early on in a relationship, where you're essentially pursuing somebody, and maybe some of your identity is put off to the side because you want to gel with this person, you want to get along with them. But eventually our identities come back. We are who we are for years of growth, and our natural just qualities that we were born with. So we have to carry those in with us and present them in a way that's going to be safe for somebody, which of course nobody's perfect. We make mistakes. We have issues along the way, and we have to somehow again try and take ownership over that without compromising who we are. So when we do see something as maybe a little bit of a mismatch of values, again, you got to go back to that process of inquiry and being curious and presenting yourself in a way that's safe to them, or safe for yourself and them. in a disagreement. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but essentially what I'm saying is that if you try and create a trust building exercise with somebody every day, even if you disagree with them, if you're showing them at least that you're willing to listen, that's gonna stand through the disagreements you have. And if it turns out the two of you just simply aren't going to match up, that should come through too. It doesn't have to be in some way that this person's identity is directly trying to destroy my own identity. No, instead, we are just trying to figure out life as we best understand it. Is it wrong to be curious? No, not at all. It's only for the benefit of you and this other person to build trust, even if you don't see eye to eye. I, an easy one could be I couldn't date somebody who smokes, and if they say to me, um, smoking is something that helps calm me. It's something that I do when I need to step away from things. It's my calming coping mechanism. I'd say, okay, I understand. My choice is to not have that in my life. That's a respectful way to do it. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and say, well, you're an idiot for smoking, you're going to kill yourself someday because of this bad habit. Well, then clearly I've stepped over the line and I've not really heard this person. Yes, I believe smoking's unhealthy, but do I have to suggest that this person's, a fool, an idiot, what have you? No, that would be pretty cruel. I think it's very easy to destroy trust through the process of standing up for yourself, or whatever that looks like in the moment, where you are no longer fighting for the relationship. You're just trying to fight against the other person's a view or perspective, because chances are at that point you're not really fighting against their perspective. You're reaching the point of defensiveness, and somewhere in us we feel this attack on us. And so, yeah, the natural tendency is to defend. But man, there's nothing much more powerful than the ability to take what somebody has said and kind of ask a question in return, instead of fighting. And you mentioned I've heard it time and again with a lot of guys who say, she did this, she did that, and her this, her that. And I've challenged them. I say, can you talk about the situation without using those words? Because then it requires a lot more perspective that I can only take ownership over, which is myself, and say, well, I was doing this, this and that. It came to this point, and I felt this way, I thought this way, and then therefore you see, I don't have the opportunity to suggest this person is who I suggest they are against me. Rather, I am working on myself in this moment. And here's what I stand for. Here are the values that I hold dear to my, close to my heart. And that's it. I can't then jump into the other person's shoes and say, now I'm going to tell you who they are and why they're destroying my life. I did write some notes on some of the stuff that I think might be of value too. I consider myself a good person. I consider myself a good person 10 years ago. I believe I've been a good person most of my life. But I became a bad spouse. I brought trauma to the relationship, and I acted out on that trauma, and I wasn't taking responsibility of that trauma. So I was acting out of defensiveness when she pointed out things that were hurting her based on my actions from my upbringing, the person that I was through the trauma, and how I did not kind of, work on that internally. In addition to that, she was kind of the avoidant attachment style. I was the anxious attachment style. So when she needed that time and space to get away, I was taking over the situation and looking at it through my lens only, as an anxious person, saying, I need to work this out. She's always this way. I was using absolutes. She's always doing this. She's always blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And that was no good. When I'll give a good example, honestly, that really I did not fully understand until later, when I kind of looked internally at myself. Is she would be the person who would naturally feed our newborn, because she had the breast milk. I obviously did not. And I took over cooking and cleaning duties always. That was kind of my thing. I did that even before kiddo was born. And there were some nights where I just kind of said to myself, I don't want to clean the kitchen tonight. I don't want to clean all the dishes. I'm just kind of done. And I want some time to do something else. And she'd get upset in the mornings. She'd say that she'd see the kitchen and she'd say, it's just a mess in here. And I know she wasn't saying that just to say it. You know, she was voicing it to me out of frustration, out of disappointment. And it got to me because I realized, not fully, but I realized in that moment, I'm being called out. Because here she is, every single time kiddo's calling her to, you know, feed him, she's there. She's not taking breaks. She's doing this. And here I am saying, well, you know, it doesn't have to be done. I can just let it go. That might be okay if you have a conversation about that, if the expectations in the relationship are understood and you talk about it. But instead, we had that unfortunate problem where I just left it and she trusted me to do it. And I basically destroyed that trust by not doing it. And so she'd get upset and then I'd get defensive because I was called out on it. There, you know, we could say she could have approached me in a different way, but really, what does that do for me now? Does that do any good for me to say, okay, well, she could have done it this way and then everything would have been okay? Like you said earlier, I did not need to do that. All I needed to do is take a hold of my part in that moment and be curious. How can I best serve us in this situation? How do I get us to a better place with this? She trusts that I'm capable and can do this. How do I deliver on that? That's okay. I'm not a slave to her. I'm doing my part as a partner to help the house out, to help our family, you know, continue on our healthy path.
Listening to you talk here, you know, the theme that I seem to be kind of pulling out is I think that the language that we use here really defines these ownership dynamics, right? You know, you're saying that you spoke a lot in absolutes in your last marriage, and I definitely did that. And I think 90% of relationships communicate in that way. You always do this. You always say this. You know, and I think where I've found success and in healthy communicating with my wife is to try to eliminate those absolutes or some of that language. And this even goes with the language that we don't use, right? Like you're even talking about with expectations and the dynamics in the house, you know, and you haven't talked about, you guys didn't talk about, you know, what the expectation is and what the expectation is when that expectation isn't met, you know, and I think that the language that we're using and not using builds up these resentments into these moments of a relationship where you again have this resentment towards your partner because they're not taking ownership of this. It's like, well, what are the conversations that we've had to define what ownership looks like to you? How do you want them to own up to this moment or when this arises in your relationship? Because oftentimes we're not expressing ourselves right, and then it becomes these absolutes. They always do this. They're just this kind of person. They never own up to it. You know, and then again, and through the not defining of that, you're left to go, gosh, this person never owns up to this thing when it comes up. But you've never really told them about how, you know, you expect them to own up to it, how you expect them to show up, or what you expect from that situation. You know, so I think that, you know, one of the best tools that we can take from this conversation here and moving forward into how to garnish extreme ownership in our own life is to really be conscious of the language and verbiage that we're using in these moments, both when emotions are heightened and to when we calm down. And you know, that journaling thing, that's a tool my wife did. Man, it drove me nuts because she'd come out, you know, an hour after we had taken a break from a conversation, she'd have a list of, well, you said this 45 minutes ago, and she had a response for it. You know, and it would drive me nuts, man. What do you got notes? You got field notes? You know, or she'd go, you know, well, let's go back and watch the security camera and see what you really said. And I'd, you know, that would get my defenses all up, you know, because I knew I was probably going to see something that I didn't like in that security footage, you know, or she had written something down that I had said the wrong way or that she had misinterpreted or taken a certain way. And I didn't want to revisit that because she was right. And it was those moments of like, okay, let's pause. Let's watch the footage. Let's read the notes. with an open mind that I was able to say, well, fuck, she was right. I did do that. God damn it. You know?
What does it?
And sure, there's a lot of defensiveness that goes with that in the beginning stages of that. But, you know, I think that the more that you practice that and the more that you're able to live in that and just be like, oh, well, messed up again, knucklehead you. You know,
Well, what does
is when you can start being okay with it and chipping away at it, and seeing yourself in that way, in a supportive way, in an open way, rather than seeing yourself mess up and going, God damn it, you did it again, you stupid idiot.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in this mindset of like, well, let's go back to the notes, let's look at the footage, you chip away at the defensiveness, man. Those walls come down, and you're able to go, yeah, no, I did that. Okay, I did that last week too, and the last time she showed me the footage, I did that. Shoot, she's right. I am doing that. You know, you're able to just kind of take away the stigma of that a little bit and the defensiveness.
And, you know, I want to, you know, also put another angle on that I think is of utmost importance here. We're in this relationship with this person. They didn't leave. They still are there. They want to work this out with us. And then they point to the footage, and we see the footage. We might feel that defensiveness. And that only at some point starts to just seem like the natural response because it hurts. But what are they there for? They're there because they want to strengthen this relationship. So if they point out something that we did wrong because it hit them, it caused pain. It caused pain, and they're pointing it out. They are showing us love. They're trying to reach this point with us to repair this relationship. We got to start looking at it a little differently sometimes. Yeah, sometimes they might, you know, somebody might just be a jerk and say something to you like, "Oh, you're such an idiot for this." And that's not the way to go about it. Sure, but if somebody is genuinely telling us like, "Hey man, that hurt." You could be like, "Oh, well, thank you. I can learn from this. I can grow from this. What's wrong with being a better person?" Nothing. So they're not trying to necessarily, well, sometimes, but they're not necessarily trying to take ownership of your actions in those moments when they're suggesting, hey, what happened here caused me pain. They're actually asking you, can you please take ownership of this because this will help our relationship grow stronger? And it's so hard in those moments when we're feeling like our character's put into question. But we all know when we're on either side of those tracks, we know that we've been in that moment where we want to tell somebody, hey, that hurt. And we're feeling like in that moment, we're walking on eggshells just to let them know we felt hurt. That's not a good place to be. But the more you practice that, and the more you show up and say, hey, I see you doing this. Instead of using the absolute, saying, you know, you always do this, say, maybe I've noticed this kind of pattern taking place, and when that happens, I start to feel this way. Like that, how is that something that can be denied? I'm actually feeling this, and it's causing pain. I'm presenting it to you because I love you, and I want to make this work. That's a good thing. We get so wrapped up in our own minds that we feel like throwing fists from our mouths is the best approach. When that pause, you talked about journaling, you talked about taking that second to really process and maybe come back with footage or not, at least given the opportunity to really come together in the long run is going to help save that relationship and make it grow. Man, if I could only have taken some of those words that were given to me and said, you know what? I don't need to feel threatened in this moment. I need to hear this person because I am not perfect. And they're actually telling me this is how we get further together. Man, think of how much greater so many relationships would be if we just did that ownership part.
I mean, I think you just said it right there. You know, we don't fight because we don't want to be in a relationship. You know, if that were the case, we would just leave. Why go through all the emotional torment of fighting and raising your voice and working yourself up and sweating and getting your blood pressure going? You know, you're that worked up because you care that much, because you want to fix it, because you want it to be better, and because you want it to make it grow. And I think that we lose that, you know, when the emotions boil up and you're in the moment. You know, that we forget that we are on the same page, we are on the same team, and we do have the same goal in mind. We just have different strategies to get there. We have different plays in the playbook, you know. So I think that really taking the time and the patience and the curiosity with not only your partner but with yourself. You know, again, if the ownership piece isn't just about understanding your partner, it's understanding yourself. You know, how are you gonna be better and respond differently if you're not able to do that? So, you know, I really liked that you said that there. If we can just kind of remember that piece, that we're working towards the same goal here, and we maybe just have different strategies, maybe we could be a little bit more open to listening to the other strategies.
Mm. Yeah. Some of these relationships, we don't necessarily have a choice in the matter of, our immediate family is our immediate family. This is our blood. That doesn't mean we're going to necessarily always get along. And I can say that my traumas, my experience with my parents has at many times been rough and rocky. I do. I'm not a big fan of the statement. Uh, they did the best with what they had, but I mean, there's some truth to that. I'm here standing now, making many mistakes, and I believe I'm doing the best with what I understand. Not always. I could be better, but giving our parents, giving our loved ones some sort of grace in this when we're experiencing that level of defensive with them, and telling them that we love them regardless, is a powerful thing. And it's so easy to get our defenses up when we are basically being told by somebody as an authority figure all of our lives that we don't have everything figured out. Yeah, it's easy. It's really easy to return to that little kid who's just trying to fight for himself or herself. Um, but there's still something to be learned. There's still something to be learned, and giving that gift to our parents in return too is honestly something beautiful. And I experienced that with my kiddo, like I said earlier. I got to sit there, and I didn't say, well, I'm dad. That's it. I'm dad. My way, highway. No. Instead, I said, man, Cohen, you really gave me perspective that I just didn't have. I learned something from you. And I told him that. I said, I learned something from you. This was an amazing moment, buddy. You were the teacher here, and I am proud of you. That's something that I want for everybody, because it's not easy. Intergenerational stuff, which we could talk about for a few hundred episodes. That stuff's hard to get through.
Yeah, and well, you said a piece there, about sometimes we can't control the relationships, right? And sometimes maybe there are traumatic things that have happened to us that we shouldn't have ownership. I'm talking about abuse or those kind of things. Where there is a victim in
Mm-hmm.
there, not just a victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also would like to challenge anybody that is listening that has been through trauma is, again, I think that still is an ownership piece in that, though you don't have to necessarily own the piece of whatever happened to you. I think that the ownership really relies on how you respond to the trauma, how you choose to move forward, despite the circumstances. Growing up, there was a lot of addiction in my house, and a lot of just high emotions, a lot of trauma, for a little kid. And I did use that as my narrative for a good chunk of my life, especially when I was going through my addiction and before my sobriety. Well, it's just my blood, it's just my family, it can't be helped kind of mentality. And that just wasn't true, you know. Though those things happened in my life and affected me, and like I said, had an effect on my train of thought and my emotions. Once I started taking the ownership of that and saying these things happened to me, but that's not how I'm going to be because of, uh, is really where growth started happening. So again, I think that I would like to challenge everybody out there to try to find the moments of the ownership, no matter what the situation or communication or dynamic looks like.
That's beautiful, buddy.
If you want,
Um, I really appreciate that, because it does take many forms, and one way to take ownership in those moments of being hurt incredibly by somebody you love, and then maybe carrying something with you, uh, is being able to understand your boundaries can really go a long way with keeping maybe a little bit of a, let's say we'll call it toxic relationship, in a safe place. So when you identify that stuff and you take ownership over your actions, well, how do you create boundaries around those influences and those areas that definitely like bring us to our knees and cause us pain? That's part of that process. And I know you were kind of leaning towards some other type of ownership in it, but I do believe that that's a big part of that process too, is identifying those boundaries and keeping yourself safe. And it's okay. It's okay to say, you know what, dad or mom or brother or sister, their level of influence on me is causing challenge in me to struggle with where I have vulnerabilities. So I need to set up a boundary there. It doesn't mean you don't love them less. It just means I've identified toxicity that I can at least, put out of my backyard into its own backyard, so I can keep my side of the street, clean and safe to the best of my ability. And then you therefore are taking ownership over that trauma, anything that you're moving forward with. It's hard, man. And I really want to just honor you. I know you were talking about other parts of that, and I'd love you to talk more about it, but that meant a lot. And thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that, brother. And man, I've been rolling around this idea that we should do a podcast on establishing rules for fighting. And I think I just kind of kept going back to that as we're talking about this, because I think you're right. A lot of this kind of stuff can be avoided with pre-talks about boundaries and rules of engagement when it comes to conflict and communication when emotions are high, and maybe we should do that on our next podcast is kind of come up with our own kind of rules for engagement when it comes to disagreeing with the partner. I've heard some great techniques and stuff around this about, not setting boundaries with no name calling or having some sort of physical touch or hand holding as you guys are talking about disagreements and stuff like that. So I think that could be a whole episode right there, and very beneficial to myself too, and how to proceed in those emotionally driven moments.
Yeah, buddy, that would be great. And in addition to that, I wrote up notes for this episode that I didn't get into, and the word was perfectionism. I think we could have an whole episode on that, because honestly, ownership and perfectionism, like that's a tricky place to be in, because not only is perfectionism something that it's unattainable, like you create a level of success that's just completely unattainable through perfectionism, but you also, we don't create like a sliding scale of what does it look like to be a total failure or a perfect person. Well, we're neither one of those. So where are we in the middle? We don't talk about that often enough. And then we get ourselves in trouble when we bring somebody else into the picture, because we haven't figured out where we are at in this scale. So yeah, we have a lot more to talk about when it comes to ownership, and we'll maybe use different words, but we can kind of circle back around to that, because I'm really good at finding some flaws in this guy right here, and I'm pointing at myself.
I think we all are. And this episode has been anything but perfect, with all of the technical difficulties we had and all the ADHD tangents and ramblings that we did, but we made it through, man. And I think that the perfection is in the imperfection. So I always try to welcome the adversity, the challenges, the obstacles, and the hiccups along the way, because I think that again, if you take extreme ownership, is where the growth happens.
Yeah, and I know we have some stumbles along the way, listeners. It's okay. I'm really grateful for the fact that we can be honest and raw with you, and we have a lot of great stuff coming up, and guests that we're very proud of and are continue to line up. So it's going to be an amazing adventure as we continue in our in our stumbles.
That's right. And if you guys have been listening up until this point, God bless you. Love you. I'm glad to have you along this journey with us as we figure it out. And and nick away at this. But I couldn't be prouder of this show and the stuff that we talk about and the guests that we have on. And I hope that you guys enjoy listening as well. And, I would love to hear feedback from you. If you've got some ownership stories or questions for us, we really love to engage with you guys. So please don't hesitate to do that. And thank you for joining us on this podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share all those. Whenever my daughter does it for her channel, she always holds up the fingers. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. She's got all 4 on her list of to-dos. So you guys do the same. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, CJ.
I'm JJ.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Good outro.
Thanks, guys.